Well, it's a good question. Finding examples of the churches that have sort of found this, and it's a tricky balance, where we're engaging and caring for the hurting, but proclaiming the gospel. And really, we'd be naive at best and reckless at worst not to recognize that really in the last century there were two occasions when people who believed like us, evangelical-ish, discovered social justice. One was the kingdom of God theology at the beginning of the last century, and that would later be called the social gospel movement. And we would probably say, looking in our perspective now, man, that didn't really end well. And then the middle of last century, there was the Missio Dei movement. Matter of fact, E. Stanley Jones and others would be part of that. And I think people in the World Council of Churches, the conciliar mission movement, would say that didn't end well. By the time we get to a series of meetings and into the 80s, they even move away from some of that. And so 2 times we've sort of discovered social justice and tried to integrate them, and both times have not gone well. So we ought to not, that doesn't mean we don't do it, because how do we not care about the hurting when we read the scriptures, right? How many times the poor are mentioned? How many times does Jesus evidence his concern for the poor? Some the preferred option, sometimes people refer to. So what my desire is to see, and I wrote about this in Subversive Kingdom, and it's sort of a book about how churches engage in kingdom work. And one of the examples I gave in an article on some research I did was a 12-Stone Church, and they're in Atlanta. Kevin's pastor, and what happened is they saw the need. They engaged in really some remarkable ministry, both with foreclosures were going on, but then people didn't have food for the holidays. And really they sought to, not to fix everything, but to make the world a little more like Christ would have it to be in the ability and influence that they had. They were seeking to do kingdom work. They don't hold the view they're going to usher in the kingdom of God, that they're going to make all things right. The world's still broken. Nobody gets through this broken world unbroken. It's just a reality. But to see that, I think, is a powerful thing, and I think that's something that is rich in the tradition of the Wesleyan Methodist kind of milieu. I was just a few months ago at the time of this filming, I was up in Canada. I preached at Halifax Wesleyan, Metro Wesleyan in Halifax. I was teaching at Kingswood University, which is a Wesleyan school up there, multi-denominational gathering, a few hundred people. We were talking about church planning and ministry, and we talked a lot about engaging the hurting. And I was over on the weekend. I said, well, I'll preach at this church. It was a high school, I don't know, 70, 80 people. But man, I loved that when I walked in, I saw people, I was greeted by people who I could tell loved the Lord, but also some shared their story and just how they went through challenges and brokenness. And this church was there sharing the gospel with them. And in the process, they trusted Christ. They were born again by the power of his gospel. They knew Jesus died on the cross for their sin and in their place. And in doing so, they became a kind of an alternative view of society, a new community, born-again believers, citizens of another kingdom, that they then joined on Jesus' mission in Halifax and beyond. So I think that impulse, the impulse to share the gospel through church planning, is essential. And in some parts of the Wesleyan Methodist tradition, that needs to be recaptured. In lots of parts of the Wesleyan Methodist tradition, that needs to be recaptured. Simultaneously, I think we need to maintain this heart and passion that we have for the hurting, for the least of these, that was evidenced even in the Wesleys. But I would also say, and this is the thing that I don't want us to maybe miss, is that you can, right now, I think Wesleyan Methodists have a unique opportunity in society, in Western society, North America, is a lot of denominations people don't like. People are scared of Pentecostals. They don't like Baptists. Catholics worry them. They like, in a unique way, based on our research at Lifeway Research, they like Methodists. And the question I would say is, what are you doing with that goodwill? And I want you to do more with that goodwill, proclaiming the gospel, seeing men and women changed by its power, and then living out its implications by caring for the poor and for the hurting. I would say, and again, I hope this doesn't come across as overly critical. You're asking me, so I'll answer. I would say I see Reformed church planting networks springing up all over and engaging in church planting. I see Pentecostals doing great stuff. What I see is Wesleyans not being the leaders that they could be, and I hear dissatisfaction. When I'm with the United Methodist Path One people, I hear dissatisfaction. They're trying to move this forward. When I'm with the Wesleyan Church people or the Free Methodists, I'm doing some stuff with them. I hear that dissatisfaction. But ultimately, you've got to make this a more central part of the ethos of your movement, as it was. Not to discard your passion for the hurting, but to bring that into your church planning strategy. Matter of fact, when we did research on the Assemblies of God, we found that that they had a statistically significant difference in the way that they did church plants. We studied, I think, 14 different denominations, gave us their data. But one of the reasons why is they would lay out what they call a body map and a ministry map. And when they teach their people to engage the hurting, they end up reaching more people for Christ. And so there is a correlation between those. We found that in our research in Transformational Church, a book Tom Rainer and I authored on a research project. So what I would say is not just because you have this history, but because ultimately you have in this opportune moment, and Kairos moment, some might call it, you have a good reputation in culture, which a lot of churches don't have. You have a heritage of church planting and societal concern, which right now I think would resonate well with people. Now you do it because Jesus wants you to do it, but still it resonates well with people. And so I would just say and call and ask that I think it's great, and these are my friends, the Pentecostals and Reform networks, they're all friends. I speak at the events, I love them all. It's strikingly noticeable that Wesleyan players are absent from some of that conversation, where I think ultimately you can bring some stuff that would help us all. So what I would ask is there's an old expression, what you celebrate, you become. Celebrate at your seminary, celebrate at your meetings, celebrate at your synods and your conferences and your councils and your judicatories. Celebrate church planting. Celebrate entrepreneurial planters. Don't look to, I get we want to be fair, but let's recognize we want to be fruitful and find fruitful leaders who'll plant churches, because I think ultimately a warm-hearted gospel proclaimed by warm-hearted people who want to show and share the love of Jesus is a pretty powerful thing. So come on, Wesleyans. Come on, Wesleyan Methodists. Come and we need you.